on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy Hudak, and I'm here to break down the Green Wave's 13-10 win over ECU over in Greenville to make them, I believe, 8-1 on the season and extend their road running streak to 9 games, which is the longest running streak in school history. It was definitely not the 1-0 I think a lot of people were anticipating, particularly end score wise, and knowing the offense that ECU is really able to put out there on the field. For them to come out and have a 10-0 margin in the first quarter was definitely a punch in the mouth for Tulane. And Greenville always tends to be that way. They're 2 of 9 in their last 11 contests there. And this really stuck out to me. This stat came on some point during the broadcast where Tulane hasn't given up 100 yards rushing since they played at ECU in 2021, when they had Keaton Mitchell at running back, who's now, I believe, starting running back, if not one of those starters for the Ravens. They had 222 rush yards in that 52-29 victory over Tulane. That was 30 games ago, to put that in perspective. And Tulane has not conceded a 100-yard rusher since. On the other side of the ball, despite being 1-7, ECU is not a 1-7 team. And honestly, Tulane fans of all fans should really get that after the 2-10 season. If you caught my Friday episode when I spoke with former ECU wide receiver Terrence Copper, really enjoyed our conversation about how hard the team is playing under Coach Houston, despite only having that one win. And they came out there looking like a 7-win team. Tulane, a lot of the time in that 2-10 year, yes, there were blowouts like the one I just mentioned in ECU, and the week before that against UAB, a lot of injury, I think, overload from that Ole Miss loss that kind of spiraled. But as the season went on, there were several, I believe, one-possession losses at the end of that year. Their ability to kick onside kicks and make those fourth quarter comebacks. And you heard a lot of teams say that was the hardest, one and up to that point, however many losses team they played. And then their second win of the year came in week 11. After an overtime loss to Tulsa, where you missed a chip shot field goal there, and everything kind of seemed like, all right, well, the season is all but over. And then Tulane just came out and punched USF in the mouth to have that second victory on the year. And that's pretty much exactly what ECU tried to accomplish against Tulane. And I don't really think there's that much analysis that needs to be had on the defensive side of the ball. Sure, they allowed a field goal on their first series and a touchdown on the second one, and then they didn't allow a single point after that. The first drive, there was a holding penalty on third down. Penalties or something I'm going to cover in this game. I believe the Wave had 7 total, and they really cost them at times. I don't know how sound this holding call on Lance Robinson was, but it did give them a conversion for third down that allowed them to go down and get that touchdown. I'm sorry, that was on the touchdown drive. So they didn't concede any penalties on the first drive, but the coverage was not there. And it did honestly seem like a lot of the players were just asleep or trying to overread things. One of my sideline reports in the first series after they conceded that field goal was it just felt like they were overthinking and not executing and making plays. After the touchdown series, which kind of followed up in that same manner, except it didn't feel like the effort was fully there. I caught Patrick Jenkins going over to the defensive back room and really yelling at them to step the hell up. Fair enough on his part. And then Jarius Monroe had kind of a tough series, and AJ Hampton, who comes over from Northwestern, he played a lot of press man coverage. His mental processing and understanding of the game always sticks out when I hear their sideline chats. And I really heard him calming down Jarius Monroe, who can get very emotional, which has its lows and then has its highs, which I'll get to, but just asking him kind of about what the wide receiver releases were looking like. And after that, he all but shut down the passing attack alongside several more of the defensive backs for Tulane. You have multiple depth pieces there that are able to make plays. Darius Swatson was really good depth at safety. He's missed the last couple of games due to an injury, although he was dressed, did not participate in this matchup. Kentrell Webb, to me, has been such a sneaky playmaker on defense. There was a series where he came in and he made back-to-back tackles, both of them coming from pretty high alignments to make those downfield reads, and his ability to key and diagnose and make those plays for coming in at that depth piece. There was actually a play where I believe he had a co-tackle with Devin Deal, or it might have been Jesus Machado, the 9 stuck in my head, but he reminds me of Devin Deal in the same sense of last season where Deal didn't come in all the time, but when he came in, he made it count and made plays. He broke up passes. He got his hands up in passing lanes, and Kentrell Webb has done the same. He had a pass breakup on third down last week, and it just, again, to have these guys come in, make those contributions, and to have the confidence in your defense to be able to run dime defense now 3 or 4 weeks in a row where they sub out either I believe it was Jesus Machado last week. This week it was Tyler Grubbs that they subbed AJ Hampton in for, because I just don't think you could take Jesus Machado off the field. He led the team with 8 total tackles, 5 solo, followed up by Tyler Grubbs. But 3 of the top 4 tacklers were your linebackers. Jared Small has really come on extremely strong, and he had a 3rd down stop that was really pivotal, and I believe a sack at another point in the game. And to be able to rotate those 3 guys, especially after you think of the context that this team was intending to start Machado and Corey Platt, and they only got Corey Platt for 1 game. And the production they've gotten out of that group after losing the team's leading tacklers and leaders in Nick Anderson and Dorian Williams, I mean, that just can't be understated. So that to me was the positives that stuck out of the first half. And then again, I know that the 3rd quarter starts have been of question, and it's safe to say that I don't really think that was an issue in this game. What I will say towards the end of the half is, again, it's sticking out where hearing these things on the sideline, I keep a lot of them in my back pocket because sometimes they don't really work out. But prior to the field goal drive that Tulane had to end that half, I heard Jarius Monroe go over to the entire offensive group and say, get ready for the 2-minute drill. And I'm thinking, all right, well, it's Jarius Monroe. He always talks like that, as again, a lot of defensive backs do. And he said this in our post-game show, he really hasn't been targeted much all year. Then they tried to go to Lance Robinson, who was tied for leads the nation in interceptions. So they tried Jarius Monroe again. They targeted him twice on their 3 and out that allowed Tulane to get that field goal drive at the end of the half. And Jarius Monroe was targeted twice and had incompletions on both those plays. So it's just not more than you could ask for to get your offense into position. Something I just want to make note of. First of all, the field conditions, I continue to say, and I know it's not an excuse, but it seemed like it's not turf. It was the first time Tulane's played on natural grass all year. And by the end of the game, the amount of chunks of dirt that were just everywhere and the amount of non-contact injuries, it seemed, on both sides of the ball. Shotty Clayton Johnson got hurt for Tulane. I don't, know his status. Jaquan Jackson at the end of that game as well. And it just felt like, I remember the play where he kind of fell and just sat down. And I'm pretty sure it was on that field goal drive. But the first drive for Tulane, there was 1 completion through the first 2 drives for Tulane. That was 3rd down to Shotty Clayton Johnson, who again, unfortunately, got injured, and we didn't see him after he went out of that game. But his ability to make those receptions on 3rd down has been super critical all season. And it stuck out to me, though, that it was the only completion in those 2 series, and it was on the shaded side of the field. The way that Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium was set up is east to west, and it was the first east to west stadium we were in, which meant sunrise is in the east, sets in the west, and it was right behind the press box. And there were certain times where the press box was higher than the stands on both sides, and it would get in your eye and not get in your eye. And it just, again, stuck out to me that Michael Pratt threw 2 incompletions to Jaquan Jackson and 1 to Chris Brazel, and they were all on that sunny side. And on the Brazel incompletion, I actually saw him kind of motion for Chris Brazel to come back, and then it just looked like a lot of the time the ball tracking was just lost in the air. So I don't know how much of that had to do with it or not, but it just stuck out to me that then when Tulane had their touchdown drive in the second quarter, they were throwing into the shade side. So I definitely think that played a role, as well as, again, the grass. The first drive, there was a 3rd down conversion by ECU where Jarius Monroe slipped, and then their wide receiver slipped. Watching it back on the broadcast, it didn't catch the slip by Jarius Monroe. It just shows the wide receiver, and then Jarius Monroe being a little out of position. He makes the stop, but they get the first down there. And it's just hard for me to ignore, again, the amount of slips in this game. You could see it on Tulane's O-line, and it would lead to run plays not going very far, and just a lot of plays that you might think would go differently if they were able to get a little more traction with their cleats. It's not an excuse for sure. But again, before I get to halftime, because I really only went through the first quarter, where, again, if you're talking about probably the worst quarter of the game, I think it's probably the 10-0 ECU lead that they had, where, again, Tulane had a punt, and then they turned it over on downs, and then had a touchdown drive to begin the second quarter with 8 minutes and 37 seconds time of possession, 14 plays for 92 yards. That was Tulane's longest touchdown drive of the season. And that's just a ridiculous time of possession. And that's something you've seen them do to close out games. But to have that type of dominating possession, not once, but several times in this matchup. And it stuck out to me as well that Hughes prior to that touchdown drive, which began the second quarter, and they started on Tulane's 8. And I can't really remember why, to be honest with you. There might have been a penalty. I'm not sure. But prior to that, Mekhi Hughes, there were a few runs by Shotty Clayton-Johnson. He had 3 carries for 11 yards through the first quarter. On that drive alone, he had 5 carries for 33 yards. They had a total of 44 rushing yards on that drive, and I think they had 14 prior to that. So that stuck out. On the third down run by Mekhi Hughes, where he had a really explosive gain, you saw so many snippets of Tajay Spears there where he had the vision to bounce out and then stiff arm that guy, and has really good long speed as well, but he's just stepped up to me in so many ways. This is another week in a row where he's had a reception as well later on in the game and has improved so much as a pass protector. Not to mention that was really his strength in the first place and why he was higher on the depth chart to begin with. But there have been multiple times now where I think Michael Pratt is starting to settle in more because he feels like he has that running back that can protect him in the way Spears did. And that cannot be understated. It wasn't just Spears' ability as a runner and as a pass catcher and on third down. It was really as a pass protector, picking up those blitzes. And Michael Pratt knew that. And so it's hard for me to ignore also, again, just the amount of changing of hands at running back there going on for Michael Pratt, his comfortability. And I think you're really just seeing Mekhi Hughes settle in here. The problem is, I think Shotty Clayton-Johnson was making a solid case to be running back too, and his status, I'm not really sure up to this point. And you're just not really seeing, you saw Arnold Barnes go in towards the end of the game, but it was kind of at that point, okay, we need to just get our best player out there. And honestly, the best player on the field for Tulane, if you want to talk about start to finish, I'd have to say it's Mekhi Hughes. ECU had only allowed 2 100-yard rushers prior to this game, and they played Michigan and played teams that are not slouches, and Mekhi Hughes had 105 yards on the ground. Now, granted, he really fought for those yards, especially in that final touchdown drive, but to go against a team that's third in the conference against the run, despite being 1-7, and they were allowing on average 120 yards per game on the ground. But if you look at their games, there were several where it was 50 or lower, and then I think 1 or 2 200-yard outputs by the other team, Charlotte being one of those, really, I think, kind of distorted that margin. But for Julius Wood, their safety, to be leading their team in tackles. And you just saw how those players will come down from the second and third level of the field and really crowd the box as well. So having, again, a quarterback that could extend drives with his legs, I think made all of the difference in this game, including another clutch fourth down reception by Chris Brazel on that touchdown drive as well. And that, again, as conservative, I guess, as you've seen Tulane kind of approach some drives, their ballsiness on fourth down to go for a straight full send pass is just unmatched to me. And you saw it again with Chris Brazel, who's been huge in those moments. And then the field goal drive again. So you have Jarius Monroe put them in that position to make that field goal at the end of the game. There was a drop pass by Jaquan Jackson in the end zone, and essentially that would have been 7 points on the board. So you eat up 6 minutes, or I'm sorry, you don't eat up 6 minutes. You eat up 3:05. Tulane gets down the field. They do what they need to do. And now the score's tied going into halftime. So looking at the first quarter versus the second quarter, Tulane puts up 10 points. The defense holds him to a shutout. I'm going to get to the penalties in my conversation about the second half, but in terms of third quarter, this was actually Tulane's best quarter, if you want to look at it that way. Coming out of halftime, to me, in the last 3 or 4 games, including the Memphis one, it was more... Sorry, I just lost my space here. The missed field goal. The missed field goal is where things really, got a bit hairy for Tulane. I think that's a hindsight is 2020 moment, but something that Tulane really wanted to put emphasis on in this game was changing their approach to coming out of halftime. And that was really, approaching it as if they're warming up like it's the beginning of the game. So I was going around, I reported on this out of halftime, but taking notice of what those drills were like. And I wish that I had done a control, not knowing that this was going to be something implemented before the last game, but just going off of memory alone, watching the pass rush drills, the use of hands drills for the defensive line, change of direction drills and footwork drills, working with Shield Wooden linebackers where at the clap of the hands change the direction, working on their backpedaling and coverage, same kind of backpedaling wheel weaving drills the defensive backs were doing to start the game, including, catching balls in the air, both for linebackers and defensive backs working on those ball skills, the offensive line really running those drills. And even though Josh Rumetich was hurt in this game, still being dressed. And I forgot to mention this in that at that point, but I think you saw the O-line really come on strong in the second half, and having him be able to really run those plays at that halftime and simulate what the opposing team was doing, I think really gave Tulane a big edge there. And I think it did make a difference. If nothing else, I don't think it really makes a difference from a warm-up perspective, because I just don't think that halftime is really that long to go cold, especially because they come out and jog a little bit. I think it's more psychological and just getting that jolt back in you, seeing the running backs do pass protection drills and watching them actually hit things before they start the game again. I think it does give them a little sense of intensity, but not really culminating in the points that you would like, again, with that missed field goal coming out of halftime, which we will break down right now. So again, let's talk third quarter. And I am going to look down just because there are so many numbers here going on. I just want to make sure I have my head turned on straight. But I feel like the start of the third quarter has kind of been something that people have brought to the forefront as a potential problem for Tulane since the Memphis game. We're even looking back on that, it really wasn't even a bad third quarter. It was more, they allowed a touchdown by Memphis going into halftime, and then Memphis scored a touchdown coming out in the third quarter. I believe they allowed 2 straight going into halftime. It was actually 7-7 even point margin in the third quarter against Memphis. Tulane outgained them 130-83 in plays. They had 1 penalty to 0 by Memphis, and they won the time of possession battle, having it for 8 minutes and 6 seconds. It was North Texas that definitely was one of the worst outings for them, where they were outscored 21-7 in the third quarter. The offense comes out and they go 3 and out. And then the defense, I believe, allowed 3 touchdowns, one of those being back-to-back touchdowns after that onside kick. They lost they were outgained on the ground, 206 yards to just 89 for Tulane, barely won the time of possession by 40 seconds, and had 2 penalties to 0 for North Texas. So that was not great. Then they go to Rice, and it's 14-0 Rice in the third quarter. So I get where kind of the momentum builds here, where Rice had a penalty and only Rice had a penalty, and Rice had 2 touchdowns, where one of those was the interception by the offense that led to that 4-yard touchdown, I believe, by Rice. And if you look at the offensive side, they had that interception. It was nearly a pick 6. Then they punt the ball and get a field goal. So the field goal came in the fourth quarter. The drive began in the third quarter. And then ECU, it depends on how you want to look at this one, because it's a zero burger on both sides of the ball. Neither team scored any points in the third quarter. Tulane missed a field goal after and that's kind of where I'll get to this discussion. But I believe ECU had the ball 1 time in the third quarter, and that is correct. And they punted the ball. Other than that, Tulane missed a field goal and then got a field goal in the fourth quarter. The drive did begin in the third quarter. The thing that sticks out to me the most as a huge difference in this game is they outgained ECU 131-25 total yards in the third quarter. That's nuts. And the time of possession, Tulane had it for 11 minutes and 8 seconds to 3 minutes and 44 seconds for ECU. So yeah, they didn't get points on the board. They missed the field goal drive on an 11-play, 57-yard drive that was 5 minutes and 6 seconds long. Valentino Ambrosio was previously perfect from that range, so I don't think the idea of icing your own kicker even really comes into play here. Obviously, there's something seen either above or just thinking that maybe the referees are going to take a look at that touchdown where they showed one brief blip of the incompletion by Lawrence Keys in the end zone. Looked like maybe his foot got in, and we could talk about that decision. But like, if you think about it, let's say they review it and it's a touchdown, then you're up 17-0 in the fourth quarter and you don't have to worry about it. And again, you're not really even thinking about Val missing that field goal, but sometimes SHIT happens. And that's kind of what happened for Tulane there. And I think if you think you have a chance at the touchdown there, you called the timeout and at least kind of see what happens there. But I think that is really where this game could have looked a lot different for Tulane. Even if they got a field goal on that drive, then at least they're 3-0 in the third quarter. And I know this sounds like 1940s football. I'd implore everyone to also look at the NFL's scoring margin going down and look at the fact that, again, Tulane is a run the ball first team, and they really just haven't been capitalizing in the red zone as much. They have 4 straight red zone trips in this game. So it's not as if they can't drive down the field. It just feels like it's lacking a little bit of spice when you get down to the end zone. I believe on the field goal drive, the first field goal drive, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it was the next one. I'm getting a little mixed up here, but There was one where they were in the end zone and number 2 for ECU had back-to-back pass breakups for them. If nothing else, I want to credit ECU's defense quite a bit for how they performed in this game. They pressured the quarterback. They blitzed a ton. They got to Michael Pratt, and they were relying a lot on emotions getting the best of Tulane. And you know what they did at a lot of time when we're talking about those penalties. But there was the first incompletion. He jumped before Michael Pratt even threw the ball. That just comes down to really good film study. And to do it again is just showing off. But again, it kind of seemed like he was trying to throw it over that defender the second time. It just didn't get there. But you are kind of missing that zip. So to only have 13 points come out of those 4 red zone trips, that isn't great. But if you're looking at, I guess, 16 points out of 4 red zone trips, well, that's averaging 4 points a trip. Could be better, could be worse. But when your defense is shutting them out like this, then I think that's good enough. The defense makes a huge stop after that. Jesus Machado on 3rd down makes a giant stop, and they punt the ball after going just 6 plays for East Carolina. And that, again, was the only opportunity I had in the 3rd quarter to even touch the ball. Tulane's 6-minute and 48-second field goal drive that came after that brought them into the 4th quarter. The defense then, after that field goal drive, holds them to 3 and out. That's where Jared Small gets his 3rd down stop. And there is so much pressure on the quarterback during that drive. The offense then punts after that. And the defense turns it over on downs. And Jarius Monroe has a stop of the game with a huge stop on 4th and 6. And then that's when Tulane goes on what I guess you could now call their signature dominating end of the game, 7-minute, 17-second, 14-play drive that just sucked the life out of ECU. The penalties I want to talk about, because talking about that field goal drive in the 4th that went into the 4th quarter, it's still good that they kicked the field goal. But I think if you look back on that, the amount of penalties that you saw kill drives in this game, I talked about this in the first half, but the first quarter, the only penalty that really was of consequence to Tulane was that 3rd down holding penalty on Lance Robinson that turned into a touchdown for ECU. There were offset penalties on the following drive for Tulane where Chris Brazel had pushed a player over. Again, the broadcast view often misses the first point of action. So I'll just tell you, Keith Brown was to the ground and there was a player over him and he wasn't really able to get up. And to me, it very much looked like Chris Brazel was just defending his teammate. And I frankly, personally have no problem with that. It also helps that there were offsetting penalties because the refs kind of quickly and correctly recognized that it was more of a defense push than anything else, but nothing that dramatic. That being said, that was kind of the first indication to me that ECU was definitely relying on trying to push the buttons of Tulane, and they've definitely done that their last 2 matchups as well. And it was kind of frustrating to watch it work so much. The Tulane had an illegal substitution on their touchdown drive. It ended up not making a difference, but it's just messy. But what stuck out to me were the 2 penalties on special teams that erased good field possession for Tulane. There was one personal foul in the 2nd quarter where a return to ECU's 50 got backed up to Tulane's 35. The 3rd quarter in that field goal drive, that's really when I think the emotions really started affecting Tulane and kind of in an unacceptable manner. Again, I don't know what's being said on the field. I don't know what's being done. I don't know what's being pulled. So that being said, it's easier said than done to sit on the outside and not know what these players are hearing in their ear all game long. But Cameron Ryer kind of punched out or pushed over a player and got an unsportsmanlike penalty. And it was a huge 3rd down conversion for Tulane on that field goal drive that erased a 1st down for them. Luckily, the defense committed a pass interference penalty immediately after that. But imagine that doesn't happen. Imagine the DPI doesn't happen and then Tulane doesn't get points on that drive. Then you're really looking at that as something consequential. The broadcast did catch how Michael Pratt went over to him and calmed him down after that. And that really stuck out to me. And I went and caught the offensive line meeting after that drive. And Dan Rochar, there's been games where he's definitely gotten hard on them, but he really, I think, had his finger on the pulse of just needing to understanding that this is really just mental at this point and telling them that all they have to do is keep their poise, that this is the kind of game that they all dream about, where at pad level, it's physical play, running it down their throats. They're winning the battle at the line of scrimmage as long as they keep their head in it and don't make more mental mistakes. So to their credit, my final sideline report before I ran up on that just ridiculous drive at the end of the game was the fact that the poise on the offensive line definitely made a difference. But it was just really hard to see that happen. And again, then you look at the 4 straight red zone trips with 13 points. In the 4th quarter, this was the special teams penalty that really sucked. There was a 26-yard return by Lawrence Keys to Tulane's 48, and that got backed up to Tulane's 12. The penalties on that play itself, too, went for minus 18 yards. So now they're starting at Tulane's 12, and immediately on first down, Alex Bauman gets a false start. So now they're at first and 15. Then on second 15, Lawrence Keys makes a 14-yard catch that would have made it 3-1, and Rashad Green gets a holding penalty. That now makes it second and 18. Again, eventually they do end up getting down there for the field goal, but it's hard not to think that the play calling strategy changed, particularly when they were so backed up in their end zone. And it just really, again, limited play calling. And it's hard not to ignore the safety looming over the background when they were that backed up. And Mekhi Hughes made a huge run on that play, if nothing else, to just get them out of the end zone. But they almost basically were just backed up straight into a safety with the amount of penalties that happened on that drive. So that's just not great. But the defense really just deserves their flowers, because after that, like I said, they go 3 and out on defense. Offense goes out there and gets nothing done, and they end up punting on that drive with 18 lost yards due to penalty. And the defense makes them turn it over on downs. Jarius Monroe steps up on fourth down, and then you see this offense really shape into what it needs to be like at the end of games. I don't know if there's a problem. I don't know if there's a solution. And I don't know if it's kind of one of those game by game basis things. Again, I have to just point out the fact that ECU did not play like a 1-7 team, and third best rush defense in the conference, 1-7 record. That comes down to your offense. You know, they've been trying out 2 quarterbacks, that their quarterback was a little better than expected to begin the game, but they really just could not get it going on the ground. They could not get it going in the air. And when they completely shut down the running attack for ECU, which is really all they had going, well, that's when the game really went nowhere. And your defense after that touchdown allowed 0 points thereafter. So the defense, all things considered, is ready to win you a championship. Now the question is, can the offense kind of get you there? And can the special teams penalties stop happening? Because I also think what you've seen out of Shedra Lewis as a returner has been nothing short of incredible. He's just so elusive and quick. But to me, there's one positive coming out of this game. And again, it's the fact that Tulane found Mekhi Hughes, and I guess not found, when you're a run first coach, and that's something that your philosophy really relies upon, that's a position that you're really looking at closely. And even though Arnold Barnes hasn't seen that much game time, he's a true freshman, and he has gotten some runs out there, including some really big games at home, and at least 2 that I can remember, believe one against either South Alabama or Ole Miss early on in the year. If Shawty Clayton-Johnson does have an injury that kind of lingers, that is a little unfortunate. And then I think, again, Arnold Barnes is really that next man up. But man, can Mekhi Hughes just put the game on his back? And this is why Tajay and Michael Pratt worked so well together last year, was because Michael Pratt can extend plays with his legs. And when you have Michael Pratt back there with the running back, and you saw the difference in how Ole Miss's defense attacked Kai Horton, knowing that he's not that much of a run threat. You see it with the Saints, why they bring in Taysom Hill. When defenders stack the box, if you can get the ball out quickly, really opens up the passing game for your receivers. And it just really felt like, to me, the sun really got in the way in those first few drives. That's definitely not excusing, again, the rest of the game. I mean, Tulane has to be better. 7 penalties, and the way in which those penalties happened were just letting their emotions get the best of them, letting a team push their buttons, knowing that all they have to do is just keep their heads cool. But I think there almost was too much of like this emphasis on playing the perfect game, on starting and having this strong third quarter. And I think Gary Smith, I was reading his NOLA.com article, and I believe he was the one who had a quote from Willie Fritz where it was almost like they were worried too much about playing a perfect game in these third quarter starts, and they didn't just focus on winning the football game. And I'm almost inclined to agree. I think you can get way too in your head at times. And as much as I think, again, a 0-0 output in the third quarter is a great play for your defense, when you look at the missed field goal that was a result of Willie Fritz calling a timeout, that you might ask him if he wants back or not. Just the decision making, there was some bad decision making by Michael Pratt in that drive as well. And you just think, are we thinking a little too much here and getting away from just executing and making plays? And I think that's what you've seen happen to the defense the last couple of weeks. And to me, after those first 2 drives, it was like something just released in them. They completely relaxed, and it was just, oh yeah, let's go out there and make some plays. So your defense, I really don't think you have to worry about. Your special teams is killer. your offense can get it done when need be. It's been ugly as crap, and it really hasn't been resulting in the output margin that you might like. But to have such a strong running back in Hughes, to know that Michael Pratt, when it comes down to it, he makes the clutchest throws in that final drive. And yeah, you could beg the question of it being kind of annoying that it takes that long, but clutch play is clutch play for a reason. And there's a reason you hear about Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, their ability to lead those fourth quarter comebacks and just dominating those fourth quarter drives. You have that clutch play in Michael Pratt and this team and their identity. And another person that stuck out to me in this game that I wanted to shout out as well was Alex Bauman. He has been huge all year, just kind of quietly here and there in certain games, but several third down receptions in this game. I believe he did not catch the only touchdown. Lawrence Keys did, but you just feel like they didn't have such a complete tight end on the roster last year. And then you saw Bauman towards the end of the year, and it's been a quieter start for the tight ends this year. And something that I have also noticed was, we know what kind of happened to Chris Carter on the defensive pass interference penalty after the Cameron Wire holding one that were personal foul that I was talking about before. Was the first target to Chris Carter that I can really remember. And you just remember how key he was in that Memphis game. So maybe they're saving him in their back pocket, but it just does feel like the personnel usage on offense just hasn't really worked out as much as you would like. But Tulane has an opportunity this weekend to get it together. And I mean, really, they need to get it together. You're looking at Tulsa, who ECU to me just doesn't compare in terms of the way that they perform defensively speaking. But when you just look at how Tulsa has really just gone down the drain this year, and that's a team that used to perennially give Tulane fits a little bit. So I can't completely turn my brain off to that. But I think if this kind of output happens next week against Tulsa, then you're really concerned here. But ultimately, Tulane's ranked 20th. They're in the driver's seat for the New Year's Six Bowl. And you just look at the Air Force, who everyone figured would go undefeated to end the year. And everyone thought Army was kind of in this their own nightmare at this point. And then Army beats them pretty handily. So it is literally any given Saturday. And these are games that, again, Tulane teams would lose in the past. And I know that gets really old to hear for people, but the slow start that they had reminded me of the times that I could really feel like Tulane was going to lose. And you just look at the UCF loss regular season last year, where the defense looked asleep and the offense just didn't really seem to wake them up that much more on their side of the ball. You just want to see, I think, a little more immediate production from them and just be able to relax for a game. But I think fans chasing that elusive game, it might not ever come to that, because it just depends, again, on what you consider a dominating game. I just want to pull up, again, the stats for this game. When you have a time of possession of 38 minutes in a game and not really having that, come on several drives, again, they're punted on several ones, but to have that 8-minute drive in the second quarter, and then there, like I said, signature 7 to 8 minute drive to end this football game. I mean, you wonder why teams are coming out hot in the third quarter against Tulane. It's because they know they probably won't get the ball back after that. So that's at least a trend that has continued. The penalties went up, and that was, again, I don't know if it was just the emotions in this game, but Tulsa probably is looking at that game and putting that in their pocket to do the same thing. So you need to see that mental toughness really shore up for Tulane. You want to see them be more productive in the red zone, but in a 13-10 game where you still outgained them 368 to 190 in total yards, held them to 70 rush yards, and again, had recorded a 100-yard rusher when they've allowed 2 all year. I know it's not the blowouts that fans are wanting, but it's ultimately a 1-0, and I think it's a lot easier going into looking at those penalties. And penalties they should be the easiest thing to clean up. And it seems like an easier said than done thing, but there are multiple personal foul penalties. Again, some of those being emotional, even though they offset with Chris Brazel and the ECU guy. To have 2 plays where your team's pushing the other, that's just getting in the other team's gotten in their head successfully. So they can't do that from here on out, but they have the New Year's Six driver's seat. They have the time with UTSA set up on ABC at 2:30, but Tulane cannot come into that game playing this way, looking at how UTSA has been able to really score on their side and get to the quarterback against ECU in a way that we didn't see Tulane do as much. Although I will say, although the sacks aren't always there, pressure and hurries really can affect a quarterback, and that more than anything else stuck out in this game. But I think the three levels of the field for Tulane on the defense, as good as Nick Anderson, Dorian Williams, all those guys were last year, this feels like the most pound for pound complete three levels that you're going to see. And really that comes down to just what's been elite coverage at times in the backfield by these defensive backs and these linebackers stepping up, making coverage plays and stopping the run and just making teams have to throw it. You think about the Kansas State win last year, when you come across a team that can't pass the ball in a credible manner, and you look at a team like North Texas, who that seems like that's all they can do, you do worry about the coverage a little more in those games. But I just think the play of this defense can't be understated. And I'd say you give the offense one more week to really get it together. You don't have that much more time left, but Tulsa is probably the easiest opponent left on their schedule. All that being said, again, 1-7 ECU, 3-point loss. I mean, I just have to continue to say good for them. I'm so glad we don't have to see them again this year. And with that, I am going to end this rant. Again, I know that there's nothing I'm going to say here that's going to satisfy fans. My score prediction, and I don't have any rhyme or reason to these. At our dinner with the broadcast crew, me and Parker Waters had the same one. It was 38-10. At least I was correct on one side of the ball for that. But I had said in the pregame show how Tulane could go up 31 points at halftime and no one would really be comfortable kind of focusing on that third quarter start. Well, even I'm now at this point kind of a victim of, you almost look at that 1-0 and you need to kind of apply it to each quarter at least, where, Tulane goes around and they all hit four fingers to signify the start of fourth quarter. I've noticed they've started doing that a lot more in the second quarter now. But when you're talking about, what they're going to do out of the third quarter and you really haven't even gotten there yet, I just think you need to kind of throw all the hoopla away, all the talk about that. And a 1-0 is a 1-0 until that becomes an 0-1. There's only so much that you can say about that. So with that, y'all, I will see you on Friday.